Hey everyone, welcome to the AI Education Conversation, where we talk AI, education, and everything in between. I'm Daniel Lopez. As we take this learning journey together, I invite you to join the conversation at the AI Ed Convo on Twitter. Let's jump in. Hello, hello everyone. Happy Easter. As you all know, AI has become mainstream this year, and we have begun to learn more about AI and its emergence through tools like ChatGPT. And in this last week, I observed something new. I observed that we appear to be hitting this new milestone in AI, and that milestone is rapid sharing of AI generated images, most popularly, as you all may have saw, the Pope Francis ones. So we knew this day would come, where AI generates images of such quality that it makes us think twice about whether or not they're real. And, this past week, I'm on vacation with my wife. I'm off the grid for a little while as we, take some time to decompress. And when I finally get back on social media, I'm seeing a bunch of pictures of Pope Francis in Balenciaga puffer jackets. I'm seeing images of Pope Francis riding motorcycles, sporting other latest fashions. I'm seeing him DJing in a nightclub. And in initially looking at these images, I had to double take because these images looked very, very pristine. They looked clear. They almost looked believable. But I think they were just so outlandish. The idea that Pope Francis would be in a Balenciaga puffer jacket riding a motorcycle, that I quickly was able to realize that I don't believe that these are real, right? And then upon a closer look, you can kind of see some other small things with them. I don't believe that the Pope suddenly adopted a lifestyle of the most interesting man in the world from the Dos Equis commercials or anything like that, even though these images were from all over the place. What I think is going to happen next, based on what I have observed in this last week, as I'm getting back to reality here and seeing all of these images, is it seems like there's going to be a meme wave headed our way here, where folks are now starting to use these very, very good AI generated image generators, to create interesting images. And this feels like a really good time to now ask some critical questions around this. Most particularly, how might these sophisticated AI image generators impact education, and what opportunities exist for us to leverage this technology? And also, where do we need to advocate for guardrails? I dig into this in today's episode. I'm really excited to just share some of my learnings with you all and to very much hear your reactions as to what you think and how you think we could be using or not using these AI image generators. But like we always do, I want to make sure I'm sharing a little bit of the updates in the field on AI, in addition to the Pope Francis memory that was this last week. And there was a very big theme that I noticed was popping up in a lot of these big AI happenings here: privacy, privacy issues. I noticed that there was two big buckets of privacy issues that were coming to life and are going to prove to be very big hurdles for companies like OpenAI in the very near future here. First and foremost, we've already heard big companies, JP Morgan, Amazon, Verizon, a lot of these companies have already banned the use of ChatGPT at work. On March 31st, so not too long ago, around the last 10 days here, Italy, Italy's data regulator issued a temporary emergency decision demanding OpenAI stop using the personal information of millions of Italians that is included in its training data. According to the regular Garante per la protezione dei dati personali, if I totally butcher that, I apologize. Somebody correct me. OpenAI does not have the legal right to use people's personal information in ChatGPT. OpenAI, a lot of these AI models are starting to not just see challenges with being able to create partnerships and connections with big corporations like the companies I mentioned, but now there are countries that are pushing back. So you may start to ask yourself, well, why are they doing this? What's the pushback coming from? Why are countries and companies pushing back against OpenAI and companies using generative AI models? I did some reading on this, and from what I can gather, there appears to be two big reasons here, two big privacy challenges that are coming up from those two kind of groups of buckets here. The first is that we have to think about how generative AI models are trained. And they're really trained with two key information flows. They're trained with publicly available information from the internet, right? So either, in real time, it continues to update the model with the information in the internet that continues to be updated, or based on a static group of information, the OpenAI models or like these large language models will take a large data set, a large swath of the internet's history, use that to develop the parameters that they have. This is my understanding of it, so I definitely would, just invite any other perspectives that folks have. And then that's kind of like one big piece of how these models are receiving the information that they need to compute these responses, right? The second thing is the actual fine tuning, as we call it, which essentially is the process of folks submitting their inquiries, asking questions, asking ChatGPT or other AI models to do something, and then the back and forth responses that happen between a user and the model. So those are the two key information flows that these models use to train. Now, what Italy and other countries, as an example, or first year are pushing back is that these models again are being trained using personal information from the Italian people and without their express permission in doing so. No one has ever signed off on a waiver or anything like that. Granted, this is publicly available information, but they have never provided their permission to allow this information to be trained using the model. I've learned a little bit about privacy, data privacy pieces through this as well. And what I learned is that Europe as a whole, the European Union, the GDPR has a lot of very clear rules around data privacy, which actually cover the way organizations collect, store, and use people's personal data and protect the data for more than the 400 million people living across the EU in general, right, which Italy is a part of. The personal data can be anything from a person's name to their IP address. And if it can be used to identify someone, it definitely counts as personal information. So, all that to say, what these rules are do and what they do to protect people across the European Union is to protect them. And what it is saying to orgs like OpenAI is that just because somebody's information is public doesn't mean you can kind of vacuum it all up and do anything that you want with it. And this is exactly, I think, the challenge right now that OpenAI is experiencing with Italy. It's likely that some of the other countries, in particular in the European Union, potentially will follow suit under the same protections that they're having there. Now, kind of on the other facet of this challenge, the fine tuning piece, what I saw is, again, companies are beginning to very much scale back their employee use or banning use altogether on some of these AI models because of the fact that it's public information, right? We know in Chat GPT is very clear about this in the usage of their model. There's messages when you're using it which say, if you start to ask, do inquiries, do responses, OpenAI is open that they retain and they keep the information in their public domains, right? In their surveys as you're asking it. So there was an article that came out, and again, I will link all of these sources on our Twitter as I always do so that you can read in further detail if this is of interest to you. But they had shared recently, it was reported that Samsung, another company who did not ban ChatGPT, but is providing a lot of cautions and warnings to employees using it. And rightfully so, because it was apparently reported that 3 Samsung employees had leaked confidential information around things such as confidential meetings and their actual source code in some of the inquiries that they had interacted with ChatGPT. Now, again, this could happen to anybody. One of the scenarios where this came up was an employee shared the meeting notes from one of their meetings, and they asked ChatGPT to convert those notes to a presentation. So again, we've talked about the many uses of some of these chatbot type models prior, and folks are just using it to be more efficient, to have a thought partner in this work. And I think they're using them in the ways ideally that these tools can be used. But the problem is, and something that we're now going to start to run into, is when you're oversharing some of that private information for your company, for your school district, for your classroom, you may run into privacy issues there. So that's something I think we'll have to continue to monitor. I think like my high level takeaway and just seeing some of these updates that had come up this week around privacy is that I think we need to definitely continue to monitor how privacy issues shake out. Definitely my public service announcement, my recommendation is that if you are in a school district, in a nonprofit, in a business where you're exchanging student information or any kind of private information and you're using some of these tools like ChatGPT, please do not share any personal student or school information in these. If you are wanting to do some kind of role playing scenario or you're wanting to use AI as a thought partner, I definitely encourage and invite that. But make sure that you're using hypothetical situations, never using specific student information or personal information, because as you can see, they ultimately are going to keep that information, right? That's information now that they have on their public servers. So we want to make sure that we're always being careful about that. I think likely beyond that, what I'm also thinking about is this privacy concerns could potentially mean that we end up having this emergence of a lot of these like boutique type of AI chatbots, which maybe do provide like an AI service for companies or school districts behind a private server where a lot of this information is cryptic and is not public information. That's just kind of like my armchair guess as to like what could come from this as well. So I wanted to share those updates. I think there was, like I said, a big theme around privacy this week, and wanted to give you all a sense of how these models continue to be implemented, not just in the United States, but really across the country now, and some of the hurdles that they're running into. Now, that being said, today's episode is about image generation. It's about AI and image generation, and most notably, like I said, the Pope Francis puffer jacket images. I gotta say, if you haven't seen them yet on social media, I would definitely check them out. We'll post them on our Twitter like we always do with everything else. But they're really cool. I mean, Pope Francis looks really looked very trendy in his puffer jacket, his Balenciaga puffer jacket. But anyways, like I was saying, my wife and I were on vacation this week. I'm pretty much off the grid as it relates to a lot of big AI happenings. I get back towards the end of this week. I'm starting to check my social media, and then all of a sudden, I'm seeing tons of images of Pope Francis just across some of my timelines. And on initial glance, the images they did look pristine. I had to do a double take because they looked really good, and I'm like, wow, Pope Francis, he rides motorcycles, he does this. And as I was doing some kind of verification, some other googling, it was fake, right? These are AI generated images that were popping up and getting some publicity this week, and a lot of folks were just kind of jumping onto this and creating their own images using those text to image generators. Now, if you haven't had any time to personally interact with these tools, or if you are not exactly sure how they work, I would definitely encourage you to go listen to episode 2 of the AI education conversation. We do a deep dive into Dolly 2, and we explain a little bit more about these, but just high level so that we're all on the same page. A lot of these text to image generators are really cool because what essentially very similar to one of these text to text responses, what it allows you to do is you're able to type in a very specific prompt. And so, as an example, let's say I typed in Pope Francis wearing a white puffer jacket in New York City with a black and white landscape. What will happen is these AI generated image generators will then pop up multiple images based on the prompt that I provided. And then I could continue to refine that prompt, edit certain pieces of the images until I got some images that I was satisfied with. So what really stood out to me though was when I saw some of these images, and what I have definitely thought was going to happen for a while now, and we appear to be getting closer to this, is we're definitely driving towards a moment in our AI history future timeline here where the concept art, the AI image generators, the AI image generated images are that are being created, that are trending, they're not always going to be so outlandish, and they're now very good. A lot of these images are very good. They look like they're real pictures. They look like they really happened. They're not like these images from a couple of months ago where they look very distorted. It's very obvious, what things are wrong with some of the images and why those couldn't possibly be real. Some of these images look like it could really be Pope Francis riding a motorcycle or whatever it is. And the other thing to think about is these images may not always be so outlandish, right? It's not always going to be that the images that folks are creating seem so irrelevant or not plausible. These things could start to be real. So it really is starting to get me thinking, how might sophisticated AI generated images impact our education, right? And the way we educate our young people. It's also making me think what opportunities exist to leverage this, but then also where do we need to make sure we're advocating for guardrails as well. So I started to think about some of those questions. As you can imagine, this is pretty uncharted waters in terms of just data and research that's happening. But I did stumble across a paper that I found really interesting that I wanted to share a little bit more about in answering this question today by Saim Aktay, who is from Turkey. And Saim, he has some answers to these questions in a paper he published titled The Usability of the Images Generated by AI in Education in the International Technology and Education Journal. And this was published last December, so pretty recent here. Aktay, in his paper, he was testing the Dolly 2 model, which, as we know, that's going to be the model actually by OpenAI, the same people who create ChatGPT, for their text to image generator here. And he then tests DALL-E 2 across a lot of different prompt examples, right? So what I mean by prompt examples is he types in some prompts that include people, some that include animals, some that include landscapes, some that include objects, movement, some that are kind of more caricature. He calls them absurd images. They look kind of like cartoony. And I think his intention in that is two things. He was really trying to determine how good is the technology that we have in creating the types of images. And then in addition to that, I think he's also interested in exploring some of the beneficial use cases for having a text to image generator. Overall, as I was scanning his paper and looking at some of the examples that he provides, and again, I'll link that on our social media so that you can check out all of the examples, the prompts he put. He really had a very interesting paper where he does include some of the images for the prompts that he includes so you can see them yourself. But Aktay, what he finds is that the images created by artificial intelligence are generally very effective and successful across all the categories he tested. He finds that there's sometimes as problems when you're using images in the human category for training purposes due to like deformities that can take place, such as like in the eyes don't quite look human like. Maybe sometimes there's a missing finger or something like that there. But generally speaking, across all of the other formats, this problem seems to be like not there, right? It's really when it comes to like facial features, some of those things where he saw a little bit of distortion coming up there. But generally, again, if you look at some of the pictures that he generated response for, they all look pretty human. They could look better. And I think obviously we've had some evolution since then as we look at some of these Pope Francis ones now, folks who really know how to engineer really good prompts to get really, really strong images based on that. Taking away his conclusions, taking away this recent wave that happened last week with Pope Francis, I think that this really does confirm that we have reached this point, as I continue to kind of express here, that if you look closely, these images though are really, really good and they're starting to be very believable, right? Even though sometimes you may see a little bit of distortion. Beyond that, Aktay, as he draws this big conclusion about just the efficiency and the effectiveness of some of these models, what he had also proposed is he gives us a little bit of an answer to this question of, if we're knowing these images are such high quality, how can we actually leverage these tools in the classroom? And he had a couple of different thoughts there. Well, he said, number one, obviously enriching teaching activities, right? So we can produce images using AI that can help to explain topics and ideas in a more interactive manner, right? So if there's lessons in a biology, and maybe instead of describing what a mitochondria is, if you want to generate some more lively images, or you're trying to generate images from a very specific process that may not be listed in the textbooks at all, you might be able to use these image generators to generate some images to give students clarity as to what is happening in a lecture that you're describing. He also mentions that avoid problems with copyrights in the future. I don't know. I exactly know if I agree about this, but again, his argument was that since images produced by artificial intelligence are original and unique, they can be considered more reliable because they eliminate the copyright problems that may occur with images taken from environments such as the internet. I think that's partially true, but I do think if we're thinking about the privacy concerns that we had talked about earlier, there is like a slew of lawsuits happening right now from very, very large art firms because a lot of just very, very unique artwork was taken and used to train models. And now, obviously, again, folks want to be compensated for that because even though it wasn't taking the exact image, that image was being used to train how these models work. So there's potentially some sticky pieces there, but generally speaking, the idea is that these are supposed to be unique images as you're typing something in that way. The other thing that he mentions is it could be used to recreate events, which I actually thought was pretty cool. But depending on some of the prompts you asked, let's say you wanted to recreate the Battle of Gettysburg and you got a lot of specific details from a textbook and you wanted to be able to type some of those in and maybe recreate a battle scene or recreate a specific image from history or a social event that's happening, you can definitely use this technology and it might give you a picture a little bit of what it may have been like to be in that specific context. We can obviously use it to make teaching content more concrete. If there's an abstract lesson, let's say you're in math and you're using some kind of theorem or formula, and it's kind of unclear for students, if there's a way you can use it more concrete with a real life example, maybe you're able to use that real life example, put it into a prompt, get an image with it. Maybe that's going to help it become more sticky for students as they're thinking about it. So, I mean, generally speaking, when Octay is describing some of the ways he thinks AI generated images can help in the classroom, I think it all falls into this general bucket of being able to leverage the power of visualization and create dialogue between teacher and student to help eliminate misunderstandings. The last couple of reasons he described kind of fall into this general bucket here, right? He really says that he thinks AI generated images can help make teaching content more concrete. He also mentions that he thinks it can eliminate misunderstandings, which I definitely can picture how this can happen. He describes how, depending on if this is a English language arts class as an example, if a student thinks that they know what something means, like they're reading a passage in a book and they see it's an antiquated mansion look, and they're like, oh, that must mean it's a new mansion, and they're typing that in, and then they into an image generator, and then they see this spooky haunted old looking mansion. They're going to be able to eliminate some of those concept misunderstandings, that vocabulary misunderstanding that may have come up there. So it can really serve in that kind of exchange process there. And then lastly, as he mentioned there's sometimes lessons, and again, I know all of my teacher friends can resonate with this, but there's oftentimes situations where you may not actually have sufficient content examples for some of the things that we're teaching in class. And so being able to create images on the spot with for processes or current events or any of the things that you need support with, you are going to be able to use AI image generated text, potentially AI generated images, potentially to support with creating more visuals to show your students in instances where there's not enough content to be able to interact with. When I was thinking about this list, and I really was receiving what he was saying about how effective these tools are in some of the ways that we were using it, I was thinking back to my own teaching experience when I was in Houston teaching English language arts. And after my first summer of teaching, I had the opportunity to go to an AP English training during the summer to learn strategies that you could use to more effectively teach rigorous text and analysis for students in the classroom. And there was a particular strategy that the facilitator had talked about that I really resonated with. I could really see how AI generated images could fall into this. The facilitator mentioned that one of the most powerful exercises we should be doing frequently in class with students is trying to juxtapose two subjects or objects or content areas that seem very different, and just encouraging students to grapple with them and talk about how they're different, how they're similar, right? And the example that he provided, he had actually given us a warm-up exercise in the class, and for all of the teachers there, and he had told us, the opener that he had asked us was, what color is Tuesday, right? And we're like, what color is Tuesday? What the heck does that mean? And again, like the intention behind that is for us to be thinking creatively and abstractly about two things that don't really make sense. And but then as we started to get into dialogue, folks had some creative responses to that. Oh, it's black because I don't really like what Tuesday means, or oh, it's orange because I think it's getting closer to Wednesday, which I think of Wednesday as yellow, or whatever it is. Folks had different kind of rationales for how they described each of those days and the colors they put with it. But it was a very interesting activity and something that I held with my students moving forward, which I was in opportunities where I saw it really trying to juxtapose different things. And really for me, I was like, logically, that experience and that type of activity makes a lot of sense, because when we really think about intelligence and how would we define intelligence? Well, intelligence in many ways, it's doing exactly that, right? It's being able to hold multiple perspectives, evaluate those perspectives, and not necessarily seeing things as black and white, right? Being able to see the context, the nuance within particular conversations and dialogue, and in many ways doing that type of experience is good practice for that. And I see an opportunity to leverage images in the same way as you might ask that question, right? Instead of asking what color is Tuesday, maybe we are showing students a particular image that feels very conflicting, and we're encouraging students to create their own interpretation of events or learning as a result of that image, right? So generating images with conflicting subjects and asking students to look at it through a literary lens or through a mathematical lens, scientific lenses, historical lenses, and say, hey, what about this image is right to you? What about it is wrong? What seems like a hyperbole? Why is this funny? Ironically enough, I think the the Pope Francis example in and the meme culture that we have, I think, in the world really lands and resonates well with this, right? Resonates to that authenticity that we hope to create when we are teaching students in the classroom, right? Students, young people, I mean, I'd like to say even old folks as well, like we love memes. Memes are hilarious, they're funny. I think all of us, we really enjoy memes, we enjoy comedy. And I think the fascination with memes in many ways is because it is exactly this, right? It's kind of like a direct challenge to the status quo or something, some news, some subject in the world that it's challenging and it is creating that conflicting message for our entertainment, right? And in most cases, the feeling that it evokes is humor, right? But in some cases, it's not. But in most cases, it is that direct challenge, those conflicting messages from what we thought we know. I would say that even looking at this Pope Francis puffer jacket example, it seems to very much fall in line with this. I was reading this article in the New York Times, and they quoted a professor, Jennifer Hurd, from the Yale Divinity School. And this is what she had said when they had talked about, well, like of all the images that kind of took off, why was the first big AI generated image trend, or one of the first, of Pope Francis, right? Doing all these things, doing funny things. And her response was that, well, global religious figures like the Pope, they're natural subjects of political satire and artistic expression. Pope Francis is ideal, she added, because he's known for his simplicity, his solidarity with the poorest of the poor. So when he is in this subject of far out scenarios, such as flying a fighter jet or wearing this very extravagant puffer jacket, it's definitely the height of incongruity, of defying expectations, right? So that this is her statement, and I think it very much just aligns with my own belief around trying to juxtapose different things, and that how that can be a tremendous thought process for learning and expanding our awareness. Overall, I think, as I'm alluding to here, my general inclination of this wave of AI generated images that is about to pop off and is starting to, is that we should lean into it. We should find opportunities to interact with, analyze, maybe even give opportunities for ourselves or our students to create our own AI generated images. Students, I think, in addition to learning and expanding their awareness about the reality around, hopefully, what it also starts to do is it starts to allow all of us to develop our lens and our muscles around where these images are actually fake and where they're not. Because as you all can imagine, this is going to be a really big challenge that we need to figure out, right? Beyond holding the space to analyze and create AI images in classroom, this doesn't solve that bigger challenge, right? The bigger challenge I'm referring to is, how do we spot AI generated images when they're so good and they're so pristine now, especially in cases where individuals or entities may try to pass them off as real and they're actually not saying it's an AI generated image with implication, and especially if those images have implications on something, like it's portraying an event that takes place or it's an action that something is doing and it never happened, and then that has an impact on that person's life, that reality, or whatever may come up in that way. I think this is a big growth area for us that we definitely have to get right. I do think giving students an experience to interact with these images in the classroom can hopefully help us to develop that lens in the short term. But I think in the long term, we really need to think about some of the things that we did not get fully right with the expansion of social media and the impact it has had on our society. And I can very much see, very similar with social media, how it started off positive. There was a lot of great things happening, and then it did lead to this perpetuation of echo chambers. It led to a lot of fake information being shared on outlets with folks believing things that may or may not have happened. And I can see that similar trend happening with AI generated images. So we need to get ahead of this. I think in education, we have an opportunity across our sector. All of us, we need to get together. We need to have conversations, and we need to be thinking about, what are the guardrails, the protocols, the tools? What do we think we actually need to be true in education so that we actually can identify fake images, not just in our schools and our districts, but in the world at large, so that these lines between what is really happening in the world, real life events, and folks' perception based on data such as images, don't continue to be blurred, right? And we can actually make sure that reality stays honest and clear in that way. There's a lot more to talk about here. I'm looking forward to continuing to just see where the AI image generation trend goes. Would definitely encourage you all, if this sounds interesting to you, play around with DALL-E 2. It is free, right? So you can go and you get some free images. If you try this out in your classroom, in your workspace, let me know what you think. When you're going through this, let me know. What do you think? How do you think we can be using this AI generated images in the classroom to promote learning or in schools at large? Maybe some things that I missed today that we should be talking about. What type of guardrails should we be using to build? I don't have all the answers to this question. I'm very curious to know what our community thinks. What types of things should we be doing to ensure that we can identify fake images, especially when folks try to pass them off as real? And again, as always, love hearing from our community. Our continued dialogue is so important to keep the conversation alive. Feel free to share your thoughts with me on today's episode at the AI Ed Convo on Twitter, and I will see you all next week.